Welcome to the show No Instructions, where we meet with founders and interview them about starting and growing their businesses. I'm your host, Chad Ingram, 3-time founder and CEO at Distro. Distro is a platform to help businesses build teams by breaking down borders around the world. Let's go ahead and get started with today's guest and see how they built their business. Okay, cool. Welcome to the show No Instructions. Today we've got Gentry Davies with us from Crew, and super excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks, man. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, for fun. Sure. I'm excited to hear your story. We know each other just a little bit, but it's kind of one of the cool things to like have people on the show and get to know them a little bit better. So
for sure.
So tell us like real briefly, what is Crew, like what you're working on today, and then we'll jump into your story.
Yeah, for sure. So Crew's a banking app for families. So I grew up
simple.
Yeah, that's the shortest version.
That's awesome.
Banking app for
awesome.
families. So we want to replace your old bank, and our angle of like why you would bank at Crew versus somewhere else is we've got really cool functionality around your family. So you can do auto sweep transfers between your checking and savings, maximize what you're earning there. Easy to set up a joint account with your spouse, kids accounts. We do like all the intra-family stuff. So we really set out thinking like, how could we make a banking app that appeals to a well-to-do audience that is actually kind of underserved? So there's really great banking apps that'll give you like your paycheck 2 days early or a $250 overdraft line, like Chime's great. But if you need to send like a wire transfer, that's not a thing that most neobanks will let you do. And so that's what we set out for. And we thought, okay, what do these people need? People that have a little bit of money, they're usually a little older, often married, often have kids. And that's a place where the bank falls down a lot of times. Yeah.
Is it like the idea where, you know, let's take like a very digital experience to banking, you know, like, is there ever an idea to have a branch or anything like that? Or is it really, let's keep this online?
No, I think like anytime you have to go to a branch, like when we talk to people and they go, oh man, you don't have any branches. Like, what if I need to send a wire? It's like, yeah, you definitely shouldn't have to go to a branch to send a wire. Like, why are they making you do that?
For sure.
And then, you know, same thing if they're like, well, what if I need to open up an account for my kids? And it's like, yeah, you shouldn't have to go to a branch to do any of that stuff. So as you go down the list of like the things, like short of getting briefcases of cash, which most people shouldn't be doing. I'd argue nobody should be doing that.
There's risky.
There's not really a need for a physical bank branch. And I think already we've kind of shifted that direction. And a lot of the legacy banks are kind of flat-footed here where they've got this massive footprint of retail locations. And they've also got a bunch of processes. I'll get really into inside baseball here of like, they don't trust their online capabilities. And so they make you come into a branch and sit across from a person. And so the existence of the branches is both like a capital drain on the business where it is money that you should be paying in interest or in reduced fees to your customers. And it's also like a functional limiter where like things that maybe you should be able to do online, they use it as a crutch. And I think it's been really difficult to see for branches to find or for legacy banks to find their way through all that.
I mean, think about like what could it be the positive impact for like a JP Morgan Chase or Wells Fargo if they could remove their physical footprint? Like think about how much money
it's a crazy amount of money,
but they won't ever do that.
Yeah, I mean, you see some local banks. JPM is kind of like an anomaly here, where like it's a drop in the bucket for them. They have they measure their deposits in trillions, or at least their volume in trillions. Right. Smaller banks, it's really, really material, and you see them literally shutting down branches so that they can try to invest in digital experiences. But if you're like a community bank or a like regional bank or something like that, credit union, very difficult to like establish top tier teams that build, phenomenal experiences. Sure. Like there's a lot of really great people, really smart people doing great work there. But it's just, we have like this massive shift where real estate used to be the name of the game with banking, where it's like the number of people that you could bank was limited by how many locations you had because they had to walk in and hand you money. And now that banking is primarily digital, it doesn't really make sense anymore. And so that shift is like a classic kind of low-end disruption model, essentially, where your capital structure is misaligned to the way that the market wants to work now. Yeah. So it's a really great time for digital banking. There's some really cool data put out by a guy named Ron Shevlin with Cornerstone Advisors, where he's done a couple surveys of like, where is your primary banking relationship? Your like checking account, basically.
For a family.
just in general, like across the US, and he'll segment it by generation and kind of show the shift over time. And, across every generation, obviously more so in millennials and Gen Z, there's this very like steady march towards like ditching the big four banks, the national banks, as well as the local banks, in favor of digital first banking options. Yeah,
it's interesting. I was actually talking to my wife about this, like different category, but I think the mindset of the predominant consumer right now, which is millennials, like it came up because my son, who's 5 years old, goes, "Hey mom, order this for me." And then he said it again about something else. "Mom, let's order this." And he doesn't say, let's go to the store. And think about like, even 10 years ago, I might have like sided with like going to a retail location to go find something or buy something.
Sure.
And now not at all. It's first I start with, where can I order it? Because I can have it in a couple of days. And I think that same expectation totally fits with how we think about money as well. If you look at like, and this is a big tangent, but like, how to manage, retirement and investment and finances and stuff, like it used to be a very, very old school way of like thinking about, where do I put my money? How do I buy securities and things like that? And even that, due to this new and growing like consumer market, is becoming way more streamlined. Even huge companies like Fidelity are saying, let's really invest in making this easier.
Totally.
But still, I do feel like banking in general like banking, has just not been disrupted the same way.
Yeah, 100%. I like to think about the finance stack. So like all the places that you go to manage your money, you've got at the bottom, you've got your checking account, then you have a savings account, and then you've got your investment accounts, and maybe a 529 for your kids. Maybe you have like the kids debit card thing. Right. Like you build out this giant stack and try to make sense of it. And it seems like the innovation has happened on a point by point basis, where it's like, let's just take investing and Robinhood will go make that much better. And then let's go take, like a savings account, and we'll have a high yield savings account over here. And then there's the kids stuff. And a lot of it's kind of bifurcated. There's some really great products out there, but if you end up choosing a best of breed stack, it's kind of a lot. You end up being a part-time CFO for your family. And each of those things, I think, works worse because it's not in an integrated product. So like, as we take the family angle to all of this thing, like our goal is to replace the whole stack and to say all of your finances can be managed for your family in this singular solution. And what that allows to do is to take what we know about the relationships between members of the family and very easily set up the accounts, very easily move money between them. So you don't have like the 3-day delay or whatever that you get between institutions. Yeah. And not only that, we can directly monetize by going after like the meat, like the place that the profits are being made here are in core banking and lending. Like that's where banks make money. And so all of these fintech apps kind of playing around the edges and doing cool little wrappers on top of those that are facilitated by Plaid or whatever, they can make money, but they're limited. They're not making like JPM money. Yeah. And so we're kind of taking a different approach by going directly for the core banking first and then expanding outwards from that, as opposed to kind of sidling our way in from the edges.
I mean, candidly, like this is just my personal reaction, and hopefully you don't take it the wrong way. I think it's a competitive advantage in some ways, but like general core banking seems like a more boring thing to go after, right?
Sure.
Like it's kind of like the baseline that's required. But if somebody can go capture that and make that maybe a little bit more sexy, it's a huge opportunity.
I mean, it's both boring and crappy, to be honest. Like
why?
You get,
why so?
Well, because you're doing all of the work. Like it's where all of your core banking is where all of the like magic is happening. It's where the money sits. And so there's increased risk for fraud. There's transaction costs. There's like building the thing that people are using as their base is harder. And like, we're stoked about that. Like we want to build the hard thing, go after the hard problem, and then, work our way down the list of all the ways that your bank has let you down and try to make it better. And that goes from like onboarding of how hard it is to set up an account to like how you interact with support, which probably with your bank you just don't do very much. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So not a lot of room for error. We talked a little bit before we hit record on like scrappy stuff that startups do and paying, payroll with credit card and stuff. And like, we can't do a lot of the shenanigans that most early startups do because we're messing with people's money. And so
how long were you guys, we're doing this episode a little backward, but I think it's interesting though. Like one of the questions I have is, typically for a true fintech product, it takes quite a while to go to market because there's a lot more going on behind the scenes to be able to do it the right way. Yeah. And I mean, how long were you thinking about the MVP? Like, from going to, wireframes and user stories all the way to like really actually coding this thing and being able to do it? Did it take quite a while?
Let's see. I'm thinking back, like Divvy before I joined, went through all of that. And I think it was about almost 2 years to get MVP into customers' hands. And there were some like real restarts along the way there. We have the benefit of fintech being much more mature now than it was when Divvy started. There's lots of great partners we're able to work with. Plus, we'd done it before. We'd been in the thick of it, not from 0 to 1, but from like 1 to 100. Yeah. And so for us, like Go was really April of last year, and then we had this in our own hands by December. So 8 months. It's
pretty good.
Which we were furious about.
Yeah, sure.
And there was like some major changes along the way. We were going to start credit card first and then kind of pivoted to banking first. With the thinking there being that like interest rates make the credit card a little harder and they make banking a little easier. So while interest rates are high, like we should definitely lead with banking and then all the other benefits I mentioned earlier of going after the core thing. So 8 months to get into customers' hands.
I think you as a founder, it was probably twice as long as you wanted because that's what always happens. Yeah. But still pretty impressive, I think. Let's jump into your story. Yeah. So where are you from?
I grew up not too far from here, South Jordan. Okay. Yeah, Bingham High School, and haven't really strayed too far. Yeah.
And so like what was growing up like, here? What was your family like?
5 boys. So lots of testosterone in the house. Let's see here. I'm a 90s kid. I played a lot of roller hockey or street hockey. I think that's every happy child in the 90s had some street hockey. I don't understand how that happened.
Like, yeah, for sure.
I never grew out of it fully. I actually still play roller hockey at a local league here.
Did you really? Do you do it now?
Yeah.
Like today?
Every week.
But roller, not ice.
Is roller. I'm not really built for ice hockey.
Wait, is that like, where do you go to play that?
So right now it's at the Taylorsville Rec Center. We used to be at the Hollywood Connection, if you knew that place.
No, I've never been
across
there.
The street from the East Center.
Yeah.
Anyway, so roller hockey is super fun. I would do it with my brother and my next door neighbors growing up and my dad's cousins. Like it's a kind of family neighbor team that's been playing together for
and you're using a ball, right? Like
it's ball hockey.
Are they orange?
Sure are.
I remember that.
A little bit of water in them.
Yeah. You remember, what was the show? Wayne's World? You're like, game on, game off.
Exactly.
We'd have those, I grew up in LA. We'd have those really crappy nets made out of PVC pipe, and we'd pull them on and off as cars were coming.
Yep, 100%.
So funny.
Someone that's good at whistling, you always had to have out there. That was my dad. So my dad always played with us, which was cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So great childhood in South Jordan. Served an LDS mission in Hungary. Went to BYU, studied strategy, and then I've been in product management ever since. Yeah. So growing up, what did your dad do for work? So he started out, we actually lived in Canada for 6 years when I was really young. He was a plant manager at OC Tanner out there.
Oh, wow.
And there was some drama at the time and bounced over to another company in Utah. That's why we moved out here. And then decided he's an independent guy, and hopefully I get some of that from him. And decided he didn't want to work for anybody anymore, and he wanted to work for everybody, I guess. So he became an insurance agent, like an independent agent. So he's been doing that for forever. And that was kind of cool. Like I got to watch him, at 2 a.m, going out to put up signs, which were, I'm sure, completely legal, and he just wanted to avoid conversations with people. But I heard him hustling kind of all growing up, which is really cool. And also kind of talked to him as he reasoned through independence versus stability and all the trade-offs that came with that.
So how old were you when he started doing that?
I must have been 10 or something like that.
Old enough to notice?
Yeah. I was an old soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were an observer.
Yeah.
You could see. Where'd you fall in with your siblings?
I was the second.
Oh, you're the second?
Yeah.
So you're a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
And how did your mom feel about that at the time, do you think?
I wasn't privy to those conversations.
Yeah, but you're an adult now. Maybe now.
I'm sure it was stressful for her. Yeah. But I think she was supportive. I think she liked the goals of being independent, and I think she'd also seen him go through the stress of, through no fault of his own, having instability at work. Mm-hmm. And so it's that like dichotomy of stability versus control, and like the illusion of stability you get at a big company sometimes. Right. And I think she was along for that journey in the same way he was, and came to kind of the same conclusion that, oh yeah, if there's this opportunity for you to build up passive income over time in like a legitimate way by building a base of business and helping people navigate stuff. I mean, honestly, he made most of his money in that time, I think, selling hospitalization riders, which are not maternity insurance riders, but they serve really well for covering maternity costs. They did so well with it that like Aflac stopped selling it in just Utah. So the country was subsidizing all the Utah births for a while there, but he was right in the middle of that, of selling like essentially maternity insurance for, I don't know, a decade or something.
That's kind of wild.
Yeah.
Do you know, it is kind of a weird dichotomy, because we talk about the freedom of being, entrepreneurs, but there's a different sense of no freedom. You know, it's kind of like choosing pain in some way.
For sure.
That's why I usually call it like, more specifically like a freedom and room to like create. Mm-hmm. Because that's kind of what you actually get. Yeah. In a lot of ways, you have a lot less freedom. But again, there's not one way to do it. So, do you feel like there was any influence for you from your father to do this adulting thing and this career any particular way, or did he just kind of do his thing and you saw it, or do you remember him being intentional about telling you about his experience?
I think like most kids, like you don't remember the intentional stuff. Like you kind of look back and you're like, okay, what were the bullets from what they did? And yeah, I definitely grew up with a desire to be independent for sure. And then like, I think, he'd say stuff of like, hey, like I'm happy. Like I could work a lot harder and make a lot more money, but then I wouldn't see you guys. And I thought that was like a cool, like he had balance even as an entrepreneur. Now there was like periods where he had to hustle to like put food on the table, especially in the early days where he didn't have any kind of base of business. And so, I got to watch him work really, really hard through those phases, and then got to watch him like find a balance that worked for him and for the family. And I think that was impactful on me for sure. There's stuff that like obviously I've taken and said, okay, I see it like slightly differently. Mm-hmm. But I think some of those principles landed, and they, I don't know if they were ever like explicit conversations, but things that I kind of picked up from his behavior and comments he made and that kind of stuff. You noticed. Yeah.
So you go to Hungary, after school, right? You go there for 2 years. What did you learn there?
Well, first Hungarian, which was a ton of fun. I'm a huge language nerd, so that was great. I'd done like some, like Spanish, French, German stuff beforehand, which all felt like Spanish and French felt pretty easy. German felt like really weird because it was all the other parts of English that aren't similar to Spanish and French. That kind of broke my brain. And then Hungary was like nothing I'd ever seen. Wild. Yeah. It's like, if you've seen those like really pretty images of all the languages of the world, there's like one big tree, and it's like Indo-European, and every language that you talk about is mostly on that tree. And then there's like this little like thing out of the root called Finno-Ugric that's Estonian, Finnish, and Hungarian, and then a few tribal dialects. But
that's interesting.
It's like completely different. It was so fun to learn.
So it's not easy to compare it to, some sort of Slavic or Latin language.
Yeah, it's neither. It's amazing. Yeah, so just have like weird grammatic.
How is it now for you?
I don't get to speak it very often.
But
I've been begging
like?
I've been begging my wife to learn it because I'm like, this is the ideal secret language in Utah. You know, like we could chat as a family. No one would know. There's like
everyone knows
a
Portuguese
few dozen people
and you know,
Spanish
here, right?
Well, and even if they don't, it's not that secretive, especially if you're speaking
sure.
with like a kind of, you know, an accent or whatever.
Yeah.
You can get the main gist, but like there's no recognizability in most of the words in Hungarian, which was really fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, just learn to work. And like I was already a hard worker, was raised that way, but there is something about trying to sell Jesus to Europeans that you get really comfortable, as everyone always says, with like rejection. You get comfortable with talking to people that you don't know, and then you also like are forced to explore stuff that maybe you weren't familiar with before. I was thinking about this yesterday. The 3 years before the mission, I actually spent, like, just looking back, an unreasonable amount of time on Wikipedia, like editing articles. And I'm realizing, like, as I've heard people make really bad arguments about stuff, and I've been like, don't you have like this basic, like, logical foundation of like arguing from facts, from first principles? And I'm like, oh, that maybe isn't universal. And I do think that like making thousands of edits on controversial articles on Wikipedia like beat that into me.
You were doing this recently or before?
This is like 16 to 19.
He's like a 16-year-old Wikipedia contributor.
And I bet you there are tens of thousands of people that were like, you know, same thing, like children in there arguing about like arcane, whatever. But it was really good because you got to realize like perfect strangers and you get to build a community together and establish what you think belongs in an encyclopedia. And I think that's like a really beautiful, cool thing. And also just a really valuable skill of like, how do you understand someone's position and then steel man their arguments in many cases? And then how do you kind of articulate your position in a way that isn't biased and then find your way to the truth together? I feel like all of that process and all those skills were really valuable in the mission of like just connecting with people and understanding where they're coming from and starting from some base set of realities. How
did you arrive at doing that exercise? Like, you know, what drew you into that?
I think it was like most people. I was looking it up. There's like maybe 300,000 people editing Wikipedia every month. Just amazing. Just all like the nerdiest, coolest thing ever, right? And I think most of them start by like looking at an article and being like, that's not right. Like, that's not how I see the world. And then you hop in and you edit it to match what you think the world is. And then you get like beat up real bad. And then most reasonable people walk away at that point and they go like, oh, okay, this is hard and awkward. Yeah. And then as a like somewhat unreasonable person, I was like, well, hold on. Like, why? Like, let's dig in. And is this person wrong or am I wrong? Like, I want to figure out what right is. And so I kind of leaned into that. And there's probably like, I don't know, 50 articles or something like that I spent just like dozens and dozens of hours on. It's really fun.
Yeah, that's what I studied in my undergrad. I became really like fascinated with validity and truth and how they correlate, and sometimes don't at all. Yeah. I studied philosophy and pre-law, and I remember sitting in my very first philosophy course. It was actually logic, and it was Dr. Carter's class at BYU. And, you know, he's like, I don't know if he's retired yet, but he's probably close. But he's written like multiple textbooks that are syndicated all over the country. And he literally said, in this class, we do not care about truth. We care about validity. And what I learned was that most people don't actually pay attention to the words they're using. And I think when you can get really intentional about what you're saying and what you're doing, what you mean, you know, it's a lot easier to communicate. Yeah. I think, you know, it's a jumping forward a little bit into your career. So at some point you go and do product, right? Yep. Yeah. What did you do right after college?
So I actually, let's see here. Big nerd in high school, took a whole bunch of college classes. So
Wikipedia guy, definitely a nerd for sure.
I got through, I know that's going to be like a crazy twist at this stage in the interview.
I love it.
So I, let's see here. I had like a good amount of credit coming into BYU. I didn't have to take a lot of the, generals there. And so my last like 2 years were pretty chill actually. Like I think I got through in 3 or 3.5 or something like that. But my last 2 semesters were like 2 classes each. So I actually started working at Ancestry while I was still think full-time, and then continued for like another year and a half after that.
What was your role there? Like,
I was an intern.
Okay.
So
but were you in product, or were you doing something for CS or?
Okay. So what happened was, this guy, Brian Hansen, was looking for help with this kind of side project they were doing. So they were testing two things. One was, can they build a product that the search is person centric as opposed to record centric? So that's little nuance, but normally when you go to Ancestry.com, you search for like, I want to see all the people named John Smith born in 1830 or within 10 years or something. And it just pulls up all of the records. And then this used a different search algorithm that looked for profiles. It used known tree data as well as combinations between different records and created these profiles. And so you could find different records that maybe didn't have any dates on them, but were attached to a person that did, or something like that. Anyway, so that was the one bit of the test. The other test was, can we, and this is totally unrelated, I don't know why they did this, but I wasn't around. It was, can we like be the Google of structured data for genealogy? So could we go out and find all of these free websites that have published genealogically interesting information and search it all in one place? So we'd show all the proprietary ancestry stuff, and then alongside that show web records, is what we called it. So that was his project, and he just needed someone to come in and test the site that they were building this to test. So I came in as like a QA intern, I think. And then like a couple weeks later, I think he felt bad at like what he was paying me, and changed my title and paid me a little more. But I ended up basically being a PM intern. Cool. My job was mostly finding websites that had a good amount of structured data.
That is product work. I mean, you're researching.
Yeah, like, it was get the job done is the job. So I ended up managing a team of contractors that were writing scrapers that were going out and like indexing all this stuff. And
what year was this?
This was 2010, I believe.
Yeah, scrapers were also fun and new at the time.
Big time. Yeah. Mozenda was a local company that we used. But yeah, that was a lot of fun, and kind of got into it there. 8 months, 9 months in, we kind of wrapped up that project, and they wanted us to take all the web records that we'd scraped and get them into Ancestry's kind of core so that it could end up alongside the records that Ancestry had proprietary access to. And so they were like, hey, we should probably end your internship, give you a full-time role. And so I went and chatted with HR. I still remember they said, okay, like, we're going to make you an associate engineer. Here's how it'll work. And I was like, well, hold on. Like, I'll do it, and thank you, but like, I'm not an engineer. Like, I'm a product guy. I don't have those hard skills. And so they said, oh, if you can't code, then I guess that means you're a PM. So that's how I got into product management. Literally is,
here's where you fit.
I couldn't code. Yeah. So then I did product management there for another 3.5 years or something. And then I went to a little ed tech startup called Mastery Connect.
Okay. Is that local here in Utah? Yeah.
It's up in Salt Lake. Very, very cool product. Had backing from like Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan's foundation. Really cool product. I don't know if you're familiar, if you're an ed tech nerd.
No, I didn't know that one.
So it's a big shift from like a consumer genealogy company to like the hardest kind of B2B, which is selling to schools.
Yep.
Selling to HR might be close.
Slow.
Really slow.
But it is sticky.
Really sticky, yeah. And so basically Mastery Connect was a Mastery-based gradebook alternative. So if you think about how you're normally scored in school, it's like 30% participation, 40% on exams, and whatever. You have like this formula and you jump through the hoops, and you're not really measuring if they learned all the concepts they were supposed to learn. You're learning, like, are they compliant? Did they show up every day? Did they learn it quickly enough to do well on the tests? And there's this movement in education, which I think is well-founded, which is let's focus on actually learning the things that you're supposed to learn in the class. And if you took a little longer to get there, it doesn't really matter. The point is, like, the point of a grade should be to measure how much you've learned, which doesn't sound like an insane thing on its face, but it's very different than the way that education works. So I got really fired up about that mission. So we built a bunch of tools to help teachers give low stakes. It's called formative assessment. So you teach a lesson, you do a real quick quiz to figure out who gets it and who doesn't. And then you break up into groups. There's all these cool teaching strategies that you can do with that data. And so we did it's called a grade cam integration, where you had a laminated bubble sheet. They give a quick quiz, you fill it out, you walk to the back of the room, hold up the camera. They'll tell you which things you got right and wrong. And then the teacher can immediately sort you into groups and then enhance or like remediate instruction.
And were you helping like?
I was the first product management hire. So we were there, I think it was like employee 30 or something. I think we maybe had $1 million in revenue. But yeah, really, really cool product.
What happened to the company?
Oh, it just like imploded. Yeah. So let's see here. What happened? We raised a ton of money. We spent it frivolously. Some really cool pictures I can send you later about like, we brought in like a graffiti artist from Philadelphia to like make this
30
huge,
grand.
Yeah, I think it was like 50.
Yeah, there you go.
We were in the Goldman Sachs building. It was like the most expensive real estate we could find in Utah.
Right.
And like, I'm saying we a lot here. Is it like a charitable thing?
Like
I was not involved in many of these decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
We celebrated like really random events with like giant cakes. Like it looking back, I'm like, oh, like this is what Silicon Valley was making fun of. Like I lived a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, the truth is like, we just couldn't figure out the motion in a scalable way. I think we got to like $3 or $4 million in revenue before I left. And so there was like a cram down round and like really painful, big layoffs. I left around that time, I think right after the first round of layoffs. Eventually the company got acquired by Instructure. And so like the product has lived on, and I think it's just an incredible product, and it helps a lot of elementary schools in particular.
So it's still going?
Still going. Yeah. It's still going. Awesome. The product is still going as part of Instructure. So I'm really glad it found a home. I made back my money that I, paid to exercise my options plus like 5% or something.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't like a venture win, but a phenomenal product that should exist. I'm glad it exists, and like learned a lot there. It's funny. Talk about this all the time. People are like, oh yeah, it didn't work, learned a lot. And I like hesitate to say that because it's like a really dumb way to learn is like, you're an idiot if you don't learn from your mistakes. Like that's, all of us deal with that. But man, like it's way faster to learn by like being on a winning team. So, learned a lot at Ancestry, Instructure, and Divvy. I learned a lot at Mastery Connect, but like not as much.
So where were you before Divvy?
So the next stop there was Instructure. Yeah. So I worked on the bridge side of the business, which was like the corporate extension side. And that was great. Got to learn a lot about management and culture and high performing organizations while trying to sell really beautiful, expensive software to HR. And it was a really tough go. And probably like overinvested in our go-to-market early on before the product was right, is I think if I look back, one of the big mistakes. They ended up spinning that business off, and it's also still going under like a parent company that's got a few of these roll-ups. Yeah. But Instructure was just a phenomenal stop. Really, really great people.
In fact,
went through the IPO there and all that.
Bridge was divested. I'm pretty sure.
After the IPO. Yeah,
that's right. We've spent some time with their leadership team.
It's a phenomenal product.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, while you're going through all this, you're learning a ton. You're seeing what success looks like, and maybe experiencing what it shouldn't look like, and maybe unreasonable burn rates. At that startup. But like, at what point are you thinking, and maybe you're not at all thinking about it, as I think it's literally different for everybody, and I don't think any entrepreneur is like exactly the same profile.
Sure.
But like, at what point is it eating at you to, I think I need to do this on my own at some point? Or are you just kind of like going from win to win and learning experience to learning experience? Or is there at some point, Gentry's going to go start something?
Yeah.
Like, how was that for you?
If you would have asked me in college, like, what's your career going to look like? I would have said, I'll go, work at a couple companies, get some experience, and then I'll go start a company. Like, that's always been the plan. Yeah. And each job after Ancestry, I said, okay, this is the last one, and then I'm going to go do it. But this is obvious in retrospect, but if you're good at what you do, there's usually like a nice carrot at the end of each year. And so by bouncing around between like these really successful companies and great teams, I got to learn a lot of stuff. I was working on interesting problems and making more and more money, and becomes harder and harder to justify jumping, right? Like when your base case is really comfortable and still being like stretched intellectually and working with really wonderful people, and you get lots of time with your family, like it's a very difficult like, hey, how about you make very little or no money, and maybe it doesn't work, and you don't get to work with all of your friends because you can't afford to, have all these people hang out. Like, it's not an economic proposition, as they say. And that's why, like, I help with the Sandbox program at BYU, and I tell them all the time, I'm like, this is when it is easiest. Like, no one told me this, but it's easiest to go start a company when your alternative is an entry-level job somewhere not making much money. You have the least to lose at that stage, which I think I might have known at the time, but I had really good opportunities in front of me and took a kind of low risk route. I told my wife when we first got married, I was like, I'll never make like $100,000. That's an insane amount of money. And there's some inflation in there.
When did you get married? Like in college or after?
Got married in 2013.
Okay.
Yeah. So just after college, like right as I was, I think it was like right after I graduated. Yeah.
And did she like, I mean, you obviously know each other really well. How much did you share with her? Like, at some point I'd like to, I got this idea, or what about this,
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about it from the get-go that like we had ambitions. We wanted to make a dent in the universe, do stuff that wouldn't have gotten done without us.
Is she a risk taker?
She grew up in a household where her dad did turnarounds. So he was the CEO of a bunch of different companies.
Yeah.
And I think like massively successful career, very stressful to watch from like a child standpoint, right? Because they're moving a lot and sometimes it doesn't work, right. Like sometimes it's a wind down, sometimes it's a sale. So I think she's familiar with some like base level of like roaring career stress, which is really great. So I think
for you,
it's really great for me. Cause I think like, first, how long has it been? Like 8, 9, 10 years of marriage. First 10 years of marriage were like very stable career wise, where it was just like going from win to win. And so, put some money in the bank there, hopefully. And then, like, honestly, like I did not take the plunge. Like I didn't finally say, that's it, I'm jumping out of the plane. So I have like a tremendous amount of respect for people who do, because I didn't like, I could pretend I did, but, as part of the acquisition of Divvy, and we can go through that a little bit. They just started firing lots of people. So I was one of them. I think they ended up firing 3/4 of the like directors and above.
Did you make, so during the pandemic, I'll never forget, because I had just sold my company, and months later the pandemic happens, and Divvy, the new unicorn in town, laid off like 2/3 of the staff, like in one full sweep or something like that. It was a heavy number.
I think it was 30%. It was half the revenue team is what it was.
Got it.
Yeah. Still
super crazy,
super
hard.
Painful. Yeah.
Super painful. And like, but also such a cool story, right? The acquisition following like not that long after that. It's a cool, like, hero story. I think it's cool.
100%.
But so you made it through that period of time.
Yeah.
So you saw that must have been hard. And we can't not talk about your Divvy in your story. I mean, it's a really cool story. So you joined Divvy. Who brought you over?
Tyler
Hope.
Yeah. So Tyler reached out to me. Blakely Cragen had gone over already. So he was like
CFO.
The CFO. He was the second kind of finance lead at Instructure. So I knew him really well from Instructure. And then I think he told Tyler like, hey, probably can't get Gentry, but go try to get Gentry. And so Tyler reached out. We had a good chat, met Alex, met Blake. Really impressed by all of them. I'd followed Tyler on Twitter for a long time, which made me both excited and nervous. I saw a lot of like, I told him this, so this isn't a surprise if he ever listens to this, but he gets into it on Twitter. A lot of like, no, wrong, kind of stuff, which is great if like, you agree, and if he's right, and if he's not, you're like, oh, this is going to be difficult. And turns out like he's a very reasonable, kind person, and also just loves debating stuff, and like matches my vibe really well there.
He's just really down to earth. When I talk to him, I feel like he's telling me what he's actually thinking.
100%. Yeah, super authentic. Like basically my playground was Wikipedia, where that was all like duking it out behind the scenes, and his was on Twitter, which is a lot more fun, I think. But so Tyler reached out. They weren't looking for like a head of product management. I think they had a senior PM role, but they brought me over as a director, and like not too long after that, I took over the product management team and got to kind of be in that role through the acquisition, and then trying to make a smooth transition after that for like a year and a half after the acquisition.
What was the state of product when you joined? Like, was it very intentional, or was it like, hey, we're still dealing with our MVP, you know? And
it was great. It was the right kind of messy, which is that like we're growing real fast. Everyone wants this, and we haven't done this before.
I was so at Jump, I maybe have mentioned this before. I've had a few like ex Divvy, you know, alumni come on the show, like Woody and you know, a few others, and I may have shared this before, but I literally remember my account manager, his name was Jordan, comes downstairs because Divvy had just moved upstairs, and hands me a stack of cards with literal like Post-it note names on each card with a rubber band around. I literally remember because I thought it was the wildest thing ever. This dude just brought me a handful of credit cards.
You know anything about PCI? All you're like,
But I don't know. We for sure were one of the first 100, but I think we were, you know, even earlier than that.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And it was really cool. It was a cool experience to see.
Was this the office by the Daylight Donuts, or the one that was closer to the front? Okay, so that's the one I started in. Yeah. So let's see,
we were first floor, you know, that whole left and back side.
Nice. So when I joined, we were doing about 10 million in revenue. So it was not a like brand new thing. Like I can take very little credit for the success of Divvy. They were like on the path, and so my role was like mostly like try to keep the wheels on as we scaled. I'd say like the parts of the product that were least mature when I joined were like the onboarding process was like highly manual. It was all through like Salesforce, and like a sales rep had to send you a link, and then it was like
I think we filled out a paper.
You probably filled out a paper,
and then emailed it back.
Just wild, right? Or MVP. A PDF at best. Yeah,
you're right.
So like we made a really good onboarding flow, and product had to be had to change pretty significantly to scale there. There was like not regulatory stuff, like functional stuff that people wanted around post-transaction review and the expense reporting type stuff that they lost when they didn't have to do expense reports anymore. As well as like, I mean, one of the hardest things that we dealt with was moving everyone from one processor in bank to another. Which we kind of outgrew our first partner bank. I remember that. Yeah. So that was like,
I had to like reapply or something.
Yeah. It was really, it was wild. It was not as smooth as we wanted it to be, for sure. So that was really painful, getting customers through that and trying to build functionality to help the sales reps who basically had to re-win the entire book of business while still growing. It was just wild. And then let's see here, what else? And then like around that time period, like we let go of half the revenue team. And so we had thrown bodies at a lot of these problems where, you know, hard to onboard into Divvy or move all your spending over. And so let's just throw a bunch of bodies at it. And these like people did a really great job. And when COVID happened and there's some like change in our funding plan, basically, that we didn't have control over, let go of a bunch of people. And so the product had to step up to automate a bunch of this stuff that we were throwing bodies at previously. And so that was kind of the main thing I focused on for maybe, I don't know, 9 months or something, is getting the product to stand on its own. The other thing I'll mention real quick is like, there's a lot of panic around COVID. We were a lender to small businesses.
For sure. I remember credit card, you know, it's like spend is going to die. And are they going to make that payment?
Yeah. I mean, the worst. Yeah, exactly. The second part's, we don't want, we'd like the spend to continue for sure.
Right.
But yeah, if the spend dies, we die. If the spend continues and we don't get paid, we die. Like there's a lot of paths that end in us dying. And I've said a few times, I've thought back of like, what was my contribution at Divvy, and did I ever earn my outcome at any point? And, I think the one thing that I did that I feel like I earned my outcome on was tempering the discussion when we were going to we were in a defensive mode. So without going into like too much detail, you know, the board was really concerned about losses. And so the way that you deal with losses is you cut people's lines.
Right.
And so they started this plan to go through, I think it was like 5 waves of reductions or closures. And
account closures.
Yeah.
Right.
So like some that hadn't been using the card
right.
For like 6 months or something, if they started using the card in the middle of COVID, we'd be like, that's kind of a sketchy, like,
yeah,
why now?
Something
this isn't a time where people are like excited to expand, at least in the early days. And so let's not let them do that. And so there's like the first wave was easy, like shut all those guys down. The second wave was like, hey, these are kind of sketchy. Like they've bounced a couple payments or they're emptying their card to cash using something like plastic or Melio. Like these people have a couple strikes. Like let's just not screw around because our risk tolerance has shifted because the macros shifted. Right. But you get into like the third and fourth, which were like, this is a customer who's like spending 80% of their credit limit. And that was the primary thing. And it's like, maybe they just don't have enough credit. Like maybe, and there were 5 rounds and those last 3 were like really significantly into muscle. I think it was like half of our spend. And I think there was this feeling that like, oh, this is going to happen. Like we're going to shut these guys down. I can't stop them basically. And I was able to convince the team that like, hey, if you're right and all of these companies are going to go bad on us, we're dead anyway. And so
That's true.
Like, let's bet that these people will be moral, good people if we don't have any reason to believe otherwise, and plan for the possibility that we get through this. And like, there's a chance that people do pay us back on April 1st, or I think was like the first payment like that we're really nervous about. April. Yeah. And we burn all these bridges, then we're for sure dead. Like then maybe we don't die on losses, but we die on growth and our customers leave us because they don't trust us, because why would they? And, providing capital to a business is a sacred thing, and we have the right to revoke it for whatever reason. And I certainly think we're in our rights to revoke a lot of those. But anyway, that was the one time that I felt like I really earned my outcome with Divvy. I was able to convince and maybe it would have happened otherwise, but it didn't seem like it at the time. I was able to convince the risk team in particular that, hey, like the line should be here, not here. And let's not cut all the meat out. Yeah, all the muscle.
That's a tall ask of you because they're very data driven, right? And and product, you try to be as data driven as possible, but also some of it is just kind of an art,
Yeah. I mean, I'm a data guy. And there are people doing, let's see here. I gotta be delicate here. There are people who are orders of magnitude smarter than me doing much more difficult stuff than I've done in my career. Like the people at FICO that are building those models are very, very, very smart people. We had really smart people on our risk team as well that were doing really, really like important work, but we weren't doing like arcane base model generation. We were doing linear regression models on pretty intuitive attributes, and then like building that on top of FICO, hoping to supplement it. That's what most fintechs are doing. Like we're not doing anything super like original researchy. And so taking the time to understand the flags that our risk folks were worried about, and then putting those in the context of like the relationship with these people. Again, I'm a big nerd. It wasn't hard to get to a point and to engage with these guys to the point that they trusted my input, basically.
Right.
But that required me to like get into the weeds a little bit more than maybe most of the team was comfortable doing. But it wasn't like Herculean or anything. It was just show me your spreadsheets, show me your model. Let's talk through the inputs and outputs. And then let's do the game, like the game theory of in these different scenarios, if we behave this way or that way, then what options do we have in the future? And ended up in, I think, the right place. And then like to America's credit, and like small business owners' credit, people paid us back, and we continued our growth. Like it was maybe we had 1 or 2 down months or something, maybe, and just continued on a tear. Obviously, like ton of tailwinds with all of the arguably too much stimulus and all that, but ended up being just a phenomenal moment for the business to kind of buckle down. Improve a lot of the flows and the experiences that we'd been working around, and maybe tighten our focus on kind of our core product.
So you guys sell the company.
Yeah.
Was it? You have to remind me. Was it
June of 21?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Remember.
Yeah, mid 21, and the acquisition was like phenomenal. I remember hearing about it like somebody reached out to me right before like it actually posted. Like people started talking about it.
Everyone did. There was a leak. It was very,
but
very
it was pretty
embarrassing.
tight.
It was maybe 2 weeks.
I did a shitty job compared to what Blake did, in being quiet about the acquisition.
Blake, to be fair, Blake did great. He was not the leak.
Yeah,
but
no, he did fantastic.
There was I think a Forbes article that came out.
That's right.
Because it became basically common knowledge for maybe I think it was a week and a half before that.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Somebody tipped me off before the Forbes
someone on the
article.
cap table who had to like vote on this blabbed.
Which sucks because, I mean, at that point, there was quite a few people on the cap table, right? Like, that's the risk,
It's a big Utah win. Yeah.
So we only have a couple minutes left, and we have got to talk about crew quite a bit, so that's great. But how do you get to the decision to start crew? Like, how do you go from, all right, this company sold, do you go to Bill for a little bit, or do you, the acquiring company?
Yeah.
Like, how do you get to the point where you say, I'm going to go do this now?
Yeah. Spent a year and a half through the acquisition, trying to keep things stable and like smooth the connection. Lots of turmoil on the Bill leadership team, still is. I think they've turned over like 7 C-level executives in the last 2 years. Like, it's just kind of a mess. Through that, most of the Divvy leadership got caught in the crossfire at one point or another. So I got let go in November of 2022. And honestly, like, was a massive relief. Like, was still vesting a lot every month. And so it like didn't make economic sense to walk away. So was trying to do my best to, make it a smooth transition and do good work, while like not necessarily having a lot to believe in the leadership. And so it was a huge relief that I didn't have to make that decision. So I got pushed out of the plane. I didn't jump out of the plane. And then at that point, thought about, okay, what do I want to do next? And like I mentioned, I kind of took this risk averse sort of, there's a step in front of me that has like a guaranteed 20% bump on where I am.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a risk averse thing. It's almost like a perspective. It's like taking the job with a really good salary is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Well,
and really good equity. It was both.
Right,
I had upside and like downside protection. So yeah, it wasn't irrational, but it wasn't courageous is what I should say. Sure. Right. So a lot of people in their founding journey, they're like, I believe the world should be this way. And so I took a bunch of personal risks to go do this. So like I didn't. And I'm not like ashamed to say that I took a pretty safe path, did really well, learned a lot, built a great network. And at Divvy in particular, learned a lot about how fintech works. So I've always been a personal finance nerd among my other, nerd leanings. I'd do like seminars on AMT to the engineers and stuff to try to like help people navigate their questions with, there's options and stuff. So personal finance has always been a big thing for me. And we had a lot of people that use Divvy in their families. They'd like form an LLC, sign up for Divvy.
I have one too.
We kind of knew.
It runs my personal family.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, capital, yeah.
And that was like an insight. I had a buddy that worked at Mercury and same thing. They were like, number one request has always been personal Mercury. And I think what that is like, we realize that our banks are not good. Like they do a really, really horrible job as far as both the offer, the experience, and the support. Like they're all bad. And it's the worst consumer experience that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? Like most consumer software has to like earn its right to be in your life. And banking hasn't felt that same existential thing. So we looked at that and thought, oh yeah, like I've been looking for a good bank for myself, and I haven't found one. I bounced around between like a couple of the neobanks that many of us have used, and they fell down in various ways and didn't like fit the bill I was looking for of like a good core banking solution that helped me make occasional real estate investments, like when I need to send a wire. Some of them didn't have joint accounts or whatever. So that was the insight. November of 22, I took a couple weeks to breathe, which my wife appreciated. And then started working, kind of laying the groundwork on the company. And then in March, raised the pre-seed, and we really like got building
to raise capital.
April.
And you still did it.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that was I call that my freebie. Just, turning in some chips from career so far, and some of the work that I was able to do, definitely was able to raise the money on, hey, like we just did this thing with Divvy, we're going to now go do the same thing for families, and had a really good team that we put together, and really proud of what we've been able to build so far. And
awesome.
There's a lot to eat. Like this is like a big elephant, and but we're off to a good start, and just really stoked to be building something that I think families really desperately need.
Yeah, I'm stoked for you guys. Like, how many people do you have right now on your team?
There's 8 of us.
Yeah, that's fun. It's still fun. Like
it's a good vibe. Like we're moving very quickly. In
market now, right?
Yeah. We've been in market. We had a beta that ran from December of last year until May. So we've been out. You can see the product, trycrew.com. It's free, takes 2 minutes to sign up. We're paying 4.7% APY.
Wow.
In savings for you and everybody in your family. And then we've got checking accounts that pay 1%. Like I mentioned, wire transfers, auto transfers. You can do allowances, give cards to your kids. Kids can log in, see their own stuff. So
awesome.
You imagine what a banking product should look like if it was built for a family as opposed to like for a single account.
Right.
That's what we're building.
It's awesome. If people have questions for you, they want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Hit me up wherever. I'm on LinkedIn, on Twitter if you like being sad, or X or whatever. But yeah, you can also email me, gentry@trycrew.com.
That's fantastic. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you for listening to today's episode of No Instructions. Feel free to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and subscribe so we can continue producing these podcasts. Today's episode was brought to you by Distro. Distro is a platform to help startups find, hire, and pay employees in over 200 countries. It's free to use. Go to distro.io to set up your free account today.